Hello, everybody. I'm a friend of Charlie's. I've known him for about the last 10 years or so, and I just wanted to give an introduction to him. We're privileged this afternoon to have him as our speaker. He's a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, Charlie Horihan. He has over 27,000 total flight hours, 7,000 hours with the Air Force and the Minnesota Air National Guard, over which 1,000 hours were combat flying. In addition, he has 20,000 commercial airline hours with Northwest and Delta, both domestic and international. Imagine what you were doing when you were age 23. Some of you who passed Owatonna on the way here no doubt saw the starburst monument of the T-38 near the Owatonna airport. Well, Charlie was flying that at age 23, going Mach 1.3, which is about 990 miles an hour. He's flown the following aircraft with the Air Force: the Cessna T-37 Tweet, the Northrop T-38 Talon, the Lockheed C-130 Hercules, the C97 Stratocruiser, which is a modified B-29 airframe, and it's a cargo airplane, the Cessna O-1 Bird Dog, and the following commercial aircraft: the Boeing 727, the Boeing 707, the Boeing 747, and the McDonnell Douglas DC-10, both domestically and internationally. Charlie could talk about many of his interesting aviation experiences this afternoon, such as his flight training, his role in the rescue of a downed pilot in Laos during the Vietnam War, a dangerous desert landing in Libya during the oil well fires to deliver oil rig firefighting equipment to and meeting Red Adair, and his aerial mapping of South America. However, due to limited time this evening, he will focus his presentation on his combat experience in Vietnam as a forward air controller in the Cessna O-1 Bird Dog, and if time permits, his experience in the C-130 over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. After the presentation, there'll be an opportunity to ask any questions for those of you that have further questions. Please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Horihan.
So now it's my turn to baffle you with bullshit, right?
Dazzle.
I grew up on a farm, a family farm near Lanesboro, about 40 miles southeast of Rochester. I grew up there and learned to operate machinery at a pretty young age. Attended a one-room schoolhouse for the first 5 years of my education, then graduated from Lanesboro High School in 1959. I attended St. Thomas College in St. Paul, St. Thomas University now. And the ROTC program there, Air Force ROTC, was required. By the way, are you hearing me okay? Am I holding this mic okay? So the first 2 years were required Air Force ROTC, and I could put one foot in front of the other and kind of enjoyed the military operation there with the ROTC. So I continued all 4 years and was commissioned second lieutenant, as well as getting my degree there from St. Thomas in 1963. But you might wonder, why am I a pilot and not a doctor? I know I spoke to one doctor just recently, but so apparently the answer is, when young, I decided to go to medical school. At the entrance exam, we were asked to arrange the letters N, P, E, I, S. Just think about that for a minute. And form the name of an important body part which is most useful when erect. Those who wrote spine are doctors today. The rest of us went to flight school. Just to be very brief, I know I have a limited amount of time here, so I'm going to just kind of skim over my pilot training and my C-130 operations in Europe, Southeast Asia, and South America, and relate some random memories of my time as a forward air controller. I started active duty in 1963, July, and reported to Reese Air Force Base. I flew the T-37 and the T-38 Talon for about 300 hours. The T-38 was a fabulous airplane. It was somewhat like if you graduated from college and you come home and Dad has got a brand new Porsche 911 sitting in the driveway, and he says to you, "Son, you can take that new Porsche car and drive it as fast as you want. I'll take care of the tires and gas, and I know the sheriff, so don't worry about speeding tickets, but just don't kill yourself." And that's kind of what we had with the T-38. It was just an incredible airplane, brand new. I was flying airplanes that had 12 hours on them. So, and we flew the airplanes at their full limits, speed, altitude-wise. The 38 at that time held time to climb records. I just reached one here. It was 39,000 feet in 1 minute and 35 seconds. That's the afterburner climb. That equates to about 280 miles per hour straight up. So it was an incredible airplane with lots of performance. In our normal climb, we usually just power, max power without burners. We climbed about 30,000 feet in 3 minutes. And my fastest speed would be a day like today with a good strong wind. I measured myself at 1,000 miles per hour ground speed over West Texas. I was at Lubbock. On my last flight, I decided I wasn't going into fighters. I wanted to go to transports. And so I climbed up about 35,000 feet, pushed it up supersonic, started rolling, and the aircraft would roll at 300 degrees per second, so a little less than 1 second to do a complete 360 roll. So I did 14 aileron rolls. I descended down to about 300 or 400 feet above the surface, flew around down there for a little while, then started climbing. And I wound up climbing up to 53,000 feet, which was about 10,000 feet at least above our normal cruise altitude or climb altitude. And I guess I picked 53,000 feet because that was a little bit better than 10 miles above the surface, 5,280 feet per mile. So I was a little over 10 miles above the surface. Not a real safe operation without a pressure suit up there, but you do wind up with pressure breathing, if anybody knows what that is. But so when the assignments were handed out, I wanted to choose the C-130 because of its mission and the travel. I knew I would travel the world, and that was certainly the case. My initial assignment was to the 41st Troop Carrier Squadron. They call them Tactical Airlift Squadrons now, but it was called the Troop Carrier Squadron. And after a 4-month checkout, we started rotating over to Évreux, France. Évreux is about midway between Paris and the Normandy invasion of World War II. In fact, it was only 20 years after the end of the World War II when I was there. I'll mention just one interesting mission that, among many that we did over there was the squadron commander chose me as his co-pilot, and we went up to Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam and picked up a large diesel-powered generator or pump, water pump, along with a couple hundred feet of irrigation pipe, aluminum irrigation pipe, hauled it down to Eledam Royal Air Force Base. It was near Tobruk. It's pretty famous from World War II, and Rommel, the British changed hands on that airfield. Rommel, of course, the Desert Fox. At the time, we were friendly with the Libyans, but not friendly with the Egyptians. Nasser was running Egypt, and saboteurs had come across the border into Libya had blown up 5 oil wells. 3 of them were able to be capped without fire. 2 of them were on fire. So we were bringing this equipment down to Red Adair, out about 200 miles south of the border, or I should say the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. We took the landing gear doors off the airplane because we were afraid they would maybe sink into the sand and would rip the doors off, and deflated the tires somewhat in order to have a little better flotation on sand. And we talked to Lockheed tech reps, and that's what they advised. So we went out there and landed, and everything worked fine, unloaded the equipment, we met Red Adair, and left. Just a few months later, in October of '65, our squadron received orders to make a permanent move to Southeast Asia, Naha in particular, Naha, Okinawa. Remember, I started at Diyarbakir, Turkey, way in the eastern part of Turkey, and by the time I got to Okinawa, it was about 16,000 miles. Just to skip over what we did in with the C-130s, the C-130s were so essential to the war in Vietnam. We operated 24 hours a day, 365. We like to say we hauled beans, bullets, and bodies, food, munitions, and we had our soldiers, wounded soldiers, perished soldiers, and of course just regular soldiers going into battle. So it was a very interesting mission there for about 14 months before I volunteered to go over to Ubon, Thailand. And I kind of knew from hearsay, but there was a special operation at Ubon. It was operating in over Laos, the secret war. I'm sure some of you have heard of the secret war that was conducted in over Laos. Laos was a neutral nation, so it was politically incorrect to realize or publicize that we were operating against the North Vietnamese on the Ho Chi Minh Trail of Laos. We would, I'm going to hustle along here a little bit, but we'd fly 6-hour flights. We'd have 2 airplanes up from 6 to midnight, and 2 airplanes up again from midnight till 6 a.m., dropping flares, looking for trucks over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we weren't very successful at it. If we could find the trucks, we would run, anywhere between 40 to 50 airplanes a night bombing these trucks. Dumb bombs, they were just dropping them under flare light. And hitting a truck at night with just a dumb bomb, unguided bombs, was pretty difficult. So, but we must have scared them quite a bit. Probably my favorite story of that operation was we came on the scene late or early in the evening, and there had been a Navy, I believe it was a Navy pilot, had been shot down, and they were going to try to rescue him. And this would have been the very first night rescue of a pilot conducted over Southeast Asia. So we came on the scene, and we lit up the night for him. We orbited around his location, kept dropping flares, and the Sandies, the ADs, Sky Raiders come in, along with an CH-53, and they were able to rescue the pilot. It was the first night rescue mission of the war. And I've got to say, it was a kind of emotional deal, but we got a check sent to our squadron at Ubon, and the check was for $40. And by the way, $40 in today's, I'm sorry, skip that part. $40. And in the memo, it was signed off, paid in full. One life. Paid in full, one life. It's kind of emotional to me because it was a pretty neat thing that we did. And we just cashed a check, of course, at the time, drank beer with it. So. But it was quite a nice deal. After 3 months flying at Ubon, which was not a very safe mission, we were getting shot at all the time by light arms, or small arms fire, and occasionally by 37 millimeter. I got an assignment to Vietnam, going in country full-time as a forward air controller in the Bird Dog. The good news in that was that I had accomplished about 16 missions over North Vietnam in the 130 at night. And each mission, it was equivalent to 3.65 days in a Vietnam tour. In other words, 100 missions over North Vietnam, you go home. That's how the fighter guys do the 105s and the F4s. So that shortened up my tour in South Vietnam by about 2 months. I returned to the U.S. For a training, and an interesting thing happened. I met a pretty co-ed. She was my sister's roommate in college. Her name was Kathy. So just had a couple of dates, and went down to Hurlburt, checked out in the Bird Dog, and then wound up in the Philippines, where we went to jungle survival school. We like to call it snake school. It was about a week living out in the jungles, and before I went into Vietnam, I stopped at the BX and bought a diamond ring. And I picked out this engagement ring, and I mailed it back to my parents. And I said, I don't seem to be emotional about this, but I mailed it back to my parents. I thought, well, at least if I don't make it back, you've got something of value, something of value for all the time and money you spent raising me. We took a C-141 to Bien Hoa, Vietnam, where headquarters for the forward air controllers were. The 19th task, and I was assigned to Duc Hoa, which is a small village about 20 miles west of Saigon and about the equidistant to the border with Cambodia. My friend, good friend, Sam Bleichelman, that we went to school with, that we were flying blind bat missions together, he elected to become a Raven FAC. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of a Raven FACs, but they were FACs operating out of Laos. And a very, very dangerous mission. And Sam went missing, never recovered. No recovery of him. So I go to Duc Hoa, and I'm flying that beautiful Bird Dog, O-1E. The Bird Dog was equipped with 8 2.75-inch rockets for marking, Willie Pete, white phosphorus, or they would throw on a couple of HE rockets that would, kind of like for us, the FACs, we could just shoot at the bad guys if we decided that we were getting bored and fight our own war a little bit and not depend on the fighters to do that. If you were to look at a map, you'd see that this area was called the Parrot's Beak. It's like a parrot's beak pointed right at Saigon. I lived at a pole compound. It was a pretty new compound. It was probably about 100 yards by 100 yards. It had only been about a year old. Living there with the Army 99th advisory team, Army advisory team. They were advising the 25th ARVN Division, the Army Republic of Vietnam Division. Pretty much a political division, not a really good fighting operation with the Vietnamese there. The runway was very similar to what you have out here, Tim. Is that about 1,000 feet? I think our runway was about 1,200 feet, so it'd be very similar to this runway. But it was really good condition. It was built with laterite. It's a tropical, kind of a tropical gravel clay mix, and it would firm up really well. If it got rained on, it would still be a pretty firm runway, so it worked good. We were equipped with 2 Bird Dogs. We had 3 pilots, myself and 2 other pilots there that flew these Bird Dogs. They were 6-cylinder engines. They were about 213 horsepower with the 2-bladed prop. There's a couple of them, I'm sure, here today. And we flew used the 8 2.75-inch rockets to mark our targets. Got pretty good at hitting our targets. All we had for a gun sight was a grease pencil mark on the front windscreen, and kind of put that on the target. We got pretty good at it as far as thank you. Hitting our targets, little Kentucky windage, but we used to try to drive or approach the target with a pretty steep angle. It's like a fighter, the steeper you are, the more accurate you're going to be. So if we're going to mark a target, you pull the nose up and power back and roll into 30, 45 degrees of bank and point the nose at the target, pull the switch or squeeze the trigger and pull off. I still remember that sound of that Bird Dog it would make when you pull the power to idle, and they would really accelerate quickly when you got the nose pointed down like 30 or 45 degrees. Pull off, and hopefully if we hit the target, we got overhead fighters. We were talking to those guys, and if we hit the target, we'd say, "You're cleared and hot. Hit my smoke." So that was the famous word, "hit my smoke," because if you put your marking rocket on exactly at the target you wanted, that was the idea. Otherwise, if you were off by 30, 40, 50 meters, By the way, we use meters and for all distances. I guess that's an Army deal, but at least in Vietnam, everything was based on meters and kilometers. We carried, for our armament, we carried a CAR-15. It was pretty new at that time. They're specially designed for special forces, and I think for us FACs. It was a M16 modified with a collapsible stock and a short barrel. We carried the M16 with 60 rounds of ammo, plus our 38 pistol revolver. That was our armament. And under our seat was a 1/4-inch piece of steel. Other than that, other than the aluminum panel along the side of the airplane, that was our defensive armor. The area I worked over was, they called it a free fire zone, so everything in this area, which amounted to, I think I may have mentioned it, it's about 300 square miles that we operated over this area constantly. We had airplanes up probably 5 to 6 hours a day looking at this area. So anything that moved out there, it was not going to move very long because we would hit it with fighters. My call sign was Allen 03, so when the fighters guys would call, they say, Allen 3, so-and-so, you know, they're wearing oxygen masks on up there, so they had a very distinct sound talking in the cockpit with the oxygen mask on. These are little things that I recall now as from my time. We're back there, and how many years ago? 50, 60 years ago. One other little item I'll mention is that you've heard of Arclight, the B-52 bomb runs. They use them throughout in North Vietnam, Laos, and even South Vietnam. So I think it was like 2 days after my arrival at Duc Hoa. In the middle of the night, there's this hellacious amount of noise. And it sounded like, if you can imagine what a snare drum sounds like, the guy's running a snare drum. It was 3 B-52s that run an Arclight mission in about 3 miles from our hooch, or our compound. And it did a tremendous amount of damage out there. It tore the country up pretty well with probably about 150, 200, 500-pound bombs. In fact, I've looked at Google Earth, and I know where to look. You can still see the craters from this Arclight raid into the northwest of Duc Hoa. We flew almost every day, hour-and-a-half missions, sometimes twice. And I worked with helicopters a lot. I think I told the story earlier today, but when I first got to Duc Hoa, there had been a lot of CBU used out there. Are you familiar with CBU, cluster bomb units? They're dropped looked like a fuel tank almost, but they would hold, I don't know, 100 of these small bombets. They were only probably 6 by 6, and they were very good against personnel, anti-personnel weapon. So they would swing by and drop a huge number of these CBUs, and the area out there where I was working was very wet, almost swampy in many cases, depending on the season, of course. But these, there was a certain amount of duds with these CBU cluster bomb units. And of course, the Viet Cong were able to recover these dud CBU units and make what's the word I'm looking for?
IEDs.
Yeah, it'd be like an IED, but booby traps. Booby traps. So it seemed like for my first 2 or 3 months, it seemed like half the time I'm working calling in dust-off helicopters to pick out these poor Army soldiers that had been wounded by CBU booby traps. So we quit using CBU completely out there. I'm kind of jumping around here a bit, but the airplane was equipped with 3 radios. We had a FM, and we talked to the ground forces, special forces. A UHF, we talked to the fighters, and then VHF, we talked to our home base. They always kept track of us. We could call them up and let them know we're still alive. So we were kind of busy with switching radios between the 3 operations we were used to doing. We worked with F1. These are fighters, F100s, A1Es, the Sky Raiders, my favorite. F5s, a modification of the T-38. The the B-57s, F-4s, and A-37s, so modified T-37. As I mentioned earlier, I think the most important piece of equipment we had was our grease pencil, because when the fighters would log in with us, we'd write down their munition load. They'd always tell us X amount of 500 pounders. They had, I can't remember the nomenclatures, but for the different bombs at different nomenclatures. So we would write that on the window of the side window or the door of the Bird Dog, and that way we knew what we were working with as far as for targeting. I mentioned earlier, we'd mark the target and then we'd clear the fighters in. I think the best equipment we worked with were the F-100s. As it turned out, I didn't know it at the time, but they were a guard unit from Iowa City. F-100 unit from Iowa City. They were based in Van Rang along the coast in Vietnam, and they were terrific. They would bomb very low, very accurate. In fact, when they dropped napalm, they were down so low, they were coming home, I guess, with pieces of bamboo in their leading edges, so they banned any level bombing for napalm, so they were only able to dive bomb it at a shallow angle, and with a napalm canister in wet country, it just basically makes a hole and it burns. It doesn't really do any good. So it was ineffective after a bit. I have to tell you about, he was one of my probably most important missions over there. I took out one morning and I checked in with the Special Forces, and he said, Alan, we're in contact with Viet Cong down here. We're getting in heavy contact. We need help. So my quickest response was artillery, and each Special Forces 18 unit had two 105 howitzers. So I called up to their unit to get some fire support, quickest thing I could get before I could get an airplane or a helicopter. And we were trained to control artillery. And the idea is that you would identify a coordinate, and I knew exactly where these guys were. I mean, we had a picto map, so I knew within 20 feet of where these guys were. So I gave them the coordinate where I wanted them to fire, which was about 200 meters from the friendlies. The first round came in. It was right exactly where I thought it should be. So I moved it 100 meters closer to the friendlies, fired, and it came in exactly where I thought it should hit. So then I moved it in. I wanted to bring it in about 50 meters from the friendlies. And I said, I gave them that correction. And I called back and said, fire for effect, which means that they're ready to go. I mean, they're going to fire as fast as they can with those 105 howitzers. So the first round hits, and the Special Forces guy, I didn't know him I knew him by voice, I never met him. But he said, Alan, that damn round just about put my cigar out. And I said, well, keep your head down because there's 10 more right behind it. Because they fire so fast that those rounds were already in flight before I could do anything about it. Apparently one of the howitzers was not quite aligned with the other one, and that's what the discrepancy was there. But fortunately, no one was hurt in that operation. We continue to drop airborne. Well, picking up where we left off when we ran out of recording space, I'm going to try to recount a few more instances of my time in Vietnam. Back in '67 as a forward air controller, on into '68. We were talking about a encounter that our special forces with their Cambodian mercenaries came in contact with Viet Cong. I think it's mainly Viet Cong because they're on the east side of the river, not out in the free fire zone that bordered Cambodia, kind of a buffer between Cambodia and Saigon. So we were operating with initially, fastest thing I could use was howitzer fire from the Special Forces camp, 105 millimeter howitzers. Shot about 10 rounds into the bad guys. The next thing was to get helicopter gunships, and then eventually we were able to use Air Force fighter jets. They're always on standby at some point in Vietnam, so we were able to go in and drop a lot of ordnance on the bad guys. This went on for basically the afternoon, where they finally broke contact. As far as I know, the Special Forces and their soldiers did not receive casualties, but I'm sure the VC took some heavy losses because we put a lot of ordnance on top of them, 250, 500-pound bombs, along with probably 20 millimeter fire from armed helicopters as well as artillery. So we continued to operate against the bad guys, and we were taking some small arms fire, but I never was hit. It stayed up at about 1,500 feet, and so the chances of hitting a bird dog are not that great. At least we didn't think it was. The following that incident, we received our first attack on our compound, the Paul compound, P-O-H-L compound. It was named after a young soldier who had been killed in that area a couple of years prior. And the attack was with 57 millimeter recoilless rifle fire. It was indirect fire. In other words, a VC, if they did, I'm not sure if they had 57 millimeter reconnaissance or recoilless rifles, or they captured one from an American unit. But they used indirect fire, and they hit the top of one of our hooches. We had about 16 hooches, I believe. It hit right at the peak of a hooch, and of course the fire was directed down, and it killed one of our soldiers. And we were in the typical Army arrangement, so the hooches were nicely arranged with our hot cots as well as our lockers. So we moved everything around after having one of our soldiers killed to at least have a little bit of protection on our cots from the adjacent lockers. The war with the Vietnamese was basically an 8-to-5 war. Americans, of course, we operated 24/7, but the Vietnamese were basically 8-to-5. The 25th Arbin Division, which was, I think, kind of a political division, it was operating as a buffer between Saigon and the Cambodian area, which was staging area for North Vietnamese troops. So it was rather rare for them to operate at night. Just a few anecdotes. The Special Forces A-team that I worked with quite a bit were typical, known for their scrounging ability, and they managed to scrounge up a propeller-powered riverboat, like similar to the boat you see in the Everglades. And so they're down on the river, and of course I'm, kind of a smart butt, and dropped down there really low, and we're doing two-dimensional dogfighting on the river there with their airboat and me with my bird dog, and a lot of tight turning and whatever, and all of a sudden my engine started running very rough, and that's not a good idea, not a good thing to happen where I was located, because it was pretty much of a Viet Cong infested area out there, so that's why we were there, of course. So I turned towards home. It was about 4 miles, I believe, somewhere 4 to 5 miles, and I was able to climb a little bit, maybe 100 to 200 feet a minute. And by the time I got home, the engine kept operating, but at a very low power state. And I got overhead, probably about 500 or 600 feet above the runway, directly overhead, kind of planning to make a SFO, or a flame-out landing, I guess we'd call it. And I pulled the power back on this end, pulled the power back, and the engine just stopped immediately. It quit running, so I made my dead stick landing down onto the runway, and with no problem. And with a little bit of vibration to roll out on this laterite runway, I stopped, and I thought, well, I'm going to see if the engine will start. And I pushed the button for the electric starter, and the engine cranked right up, and I taxied on into the base, or into our parking ramp. So I think if I had moved the throttle, or the mixture control, or even the throttle probably out on the river, I probably would have lost the engine out there, and that would not have been good for my longevity. Another anecdote, one night our commander, he decided we should go out, and I should go out and operate a night mission. We had no air or anything, but he wanted me to go out, so I said, okay, reluctantly took off. We carried one flare, and I went out, flew around a while, maybe half an hour, and realized, as I already knew, that there would be no way that we can conduct an airstrike at night. It was just the visibility was not good enough, and we didn't have night vision goggles. So when I came back, I dropped my flare over the runway and turned around and made my approach under the very dim flare light. And I'm in the flare, and I realized I'd already touched down after the flare that there was a M113, a M13 a vehicle that was parked on the runway in order to provide some security. And when I saw that 113 armored personnel carrier out there, I hit the full brakes and rudder and managed to skid around it without catching my wing on the APC, and survived that incident. It was probably could have been very, very dangerous for longevity. At some point, again, it was suggested that the FAC go out and ride in a fighter, watch them run an airstrike. I was not very happy about doing that. I had to go out to Benoit to do that. We had to turn in our weapons, and I was away from my friends. But I spent the night in Benoit. The next morning, I was instructed to go down to the flight line and meet Major Jones. We were going to fly an A-37 that was similar to the modified T-37 with the J-85 engines, the same engines as were on the T-38, but without afterburners. So I went down to the airplane waiting for Major Jones to show up. And so I am instructed to put on my flak vest, a groin protector, voice protector, my survival vest with 38 caliber sidearm, my LPU, a life preserver underarm, a parachute. So I'm like Michelin, the Michelin man getting into this airplane. And I told him, I said, you know, if we were to bail out over the area where I worked at, it was pretty wet. We'd probably drowned. I don't know if the LPU would keep afloat or not, but I wasn't a swimmer, so I wasn't very happy with having to do that. So anyway, we taxied out, and the pilot, as we were taxiing out, the A-37 canopy, you have to pull it down. And he asked me to pull it down. I did. I reached up, pulled it down. He locked it, and we got into position and for takeoff. So we talked to the FAC after about 20 minutes of flight, and he wasn't at the target yet. So the major reached down and shut down one of the engines, and that was able to extend their flight time because the engines were burning a lot of fuel. So we talked to the FAC and get to target and hit my smoke, and we rolled in real steep. He's shooting the minigun, drops a bomb, pulls off, and it says, "Oh, this thing doesn't seem to be handling right." He said, "Oh, we forgot to start the other engine." So we made the first bomb run on one engine, which was not very smart. So we got back to the base, and I was talking that night to some of the people at the club, the bar normally, and they said, "Oh, you were flying with Major Jones." "Oh yeah, I said he didn't have very much mobility with his right hand. I had to set the intervalometer for the bomb drop and all of that." And he said, "Oh yeah, he was in a fight last night and got knocked down, and he apparently hurt his shoulder really bad, so that's why he wasn't able to reach up and with his arm to move the canopy or the intervalometer." So I held off on R&R until I knew they were planning to start R&R to Sydney, Australia. So I waited to the very last in order to be able to get a ride down to Australia in R&R. And I would come back and just have a couple days back out of Duquois and head back to the good old USA. But there was a problem. I was there on the night of the 31st of January, 1968. And early in the evening, or late afternoon, I should say, we received intelligence that there was a BC battalion out near the river. And we just thought that was just impossible. So my commander, he sent my replacement out to take a look. And I had told this guy, my replacement, to be sure he stays at 12 to 1,500 feet for a couple of months. And that was the normal instruction to avoid drawing ground fire. If you're really low, you're just too big of a target, and the VC will shoot at you because they think they can hit you. So he goes out and he found the VC battalion. It was late afternoon. There was no way to get any fire back on that outfit, on the VC. But the bad news is he was shot. One round went through the canopy right in front of his head. Another round went behind him in the window behind him. So he was lucky that probably AK-47 on semi or on automatic fire had drilled a round in front and back of him. So he was very lucky that he survived that. We were normally, if we got mortared at night, which is not particularly unusual, it was like 3 or 4 in the morning when everybody's sleeping. But this night, on the night of the 31st, we got hit at 9 o'clock. And I said, you know, this is very unusual. It was going to be my last night out at Duquois. So I decided that after my trip over to the bunker, I was going to stay there and spend my night, because I didn't want to get killed on my last night in Vietnam. So sure enough, at midnight, we got hit again. And again, at about 3 a.m., we got hit pretty hard. And of course, I was in the bunker, along with everybody else that come streaming in. It was pretty noisy, a lot of small arms fire and mortar fire. And then we were very, very lucky that earlier in the day, there had been an American operation, 25th Division was operating in the area, and they got delayed. So one of their tracked vehicles parked in our compound. Never had happened ever in my time there in 10 months. We ever had any Army vehicles parked in our ramp. All we had was 50 caliber sentry posts. I think about 4 or 5 have been around the outside of the compound. But this machine was called a duster. It's called M42 duster. It had twin 40 millimeter cannons with 240 round per minute fire rate, and each round they fired out there was equivalent to 5 hand grenades. So when they started firing, and they have a clip, I think it's around 8 in each clip. It's like a choke, 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 choke. All of a sudden, everything got very quiet. And we also had a C-47 gunship overhead, and that seemed to have changed the idea of the VC and the NVA in this case, that they were going to overrun us. The Dragon, or the C-47 Spooky gunship, had a reputation as never lost a compound with where they were there early enough to prevent it from being overrun. So I thought that'd be the end of the night. Everything was settled down, but at around 6 a.m. we got hit again with another mortars rounds into the compound. In that case, it did quite a bit of damage and killed one of our soldiers. They also dropped an 87 millimeter, or I should say 82 millimeter round into the revetment, one of our bird dogs. In fact, it did a lot of damage to the bird dog. You know, it was full of holes, the tires were flat. It probably did damage to the engine. So I went out there and looked at that, and I've got that 82 millimeter mortar round, the fins on my mantle of my fireplace at home. We were able to get a CH-54 Sky Crane to come out and to sling the bird dog back to Benoit. And the bird dog, or the FAC, was very important because without a forward air controller, your air support is almost zero. And there's nobody knows where to run air support, and same as artillery. So it's very important to get these airplanes fixed and back in operation. We had later learned that the plan was for the NVA and the VC to overrun our compound. We were the only compound or military installation between Cambodia and Saigon, so it was very lucky that we had the dusters and the gunships up there to save us. I decided that I would ride into Benoit with the slick helicopter that accompanied the CH-54. So I'm walking out with my one-year bag to the helicopter, and the VC soldiers are running towards me and say, "VC come," in their best English, "VC come." And I didn't know what that meant, but it didn't sound good to me, so I ran to the helicopter, threw my bag in, and yelled at the crew. They were idling the Huey there, and I said, "We have incoming." And so they immediately spooled up, and we went up overhead, and I was looking down. I could see puffs of smoke coming up on the airfield where our mortar rounds were coming in. I was just hoping that we were not going to go back in there, which eventually we didn't. We tilted and went back to Benoit. So that was kind of, I thought, the end of my war experiences in Vietnam. That night, wound up in the club there at Benoit, working and drinking with the Aussies, which is not a good idea. It's pretty hard to beat those guys, and we got hit with 122 millimeter rockets again. As I've mentioned earlier, we had 122 millimeter rockets hit Benoit my very first night in country, as a fact. And those rockets are very powerful. They have a 14.5 pound explosive round, so they did a lot of damage that night, but I wasn't too worried. I found a bunker this time and saved our, endured the hits of artillery and rockets. The next day I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get a civilian flight out of Benoit. I'd have to go to Cam Ranh Bay in order to get back home. So I went to the personnel office and now I wanted some of my advance pay. And they were only going to pay me in script rather than US dollars because, we used script all the time in Vietnam. And I was kind of salty, and I demanded that I wanted my pay in US dollars. So they did finally reluctantly count out $1,500 US dollars in, 50s and 100s. I folded it in half and tucked it in my shirt pocket of my 1505 uniforms. And it was there until I got home about 4 days later. Went to Cam Ranh Bay and was able to get a standby flight and arrived back at Minneapolis on the 4th of February of 1968. So that ended my tour of 27 months in Vietnam. I just want to mention some of the losses we took, that airplanes that I flew or worked with. The number one aircraft loss in Vietnam was the F-4 Phantom. They lost 533 combat losses, 153 non-combat losses. And quite surprising to me, really, was that the number two aircraft losses was the Bird Dog, the O-1 Bird Dog. We lost 426 airplanes in combat, 50 non-combat. So it was a pretty dangerous mission that we operated with the Bird Dog. The F-105 was 334, and then the number 12 was the C-130 Hercules, 38 combat losses, 21 non-combat losses. Well, that girl that I had met when I was home for my training in the Bird Dog met me, I should say, with my mom and dad and Kathy. And you remember I'd sent my a diamond home from Clark when I was at Snake School there prior to the fact business. And I wound up using that diamond, gave it to Kathy, and we were married 4 months after my return to the States. My active duty was not over with yet. I still had another year of active duty, so I joined the 1370th Photo Mapping Unit at Forbes Air Force Base, Kansas, flying the RC-130A. We were doing aerial survey team missions in Brazil, doing high altitude aerial photography all over South America, Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, and we were pretty high because we were flying over the mountains of Bolivia. The mountains were running up around 20,000 feet, so we were at 30 to 33,000 feet, which was really high for a C-130. We had good production of really good three-dimensional maps for their hydrology systems in South America. So in 4th of February, 1 year after I returned, I left the Air Force and joined Northwest Airlines, became a 727 flight engineer, and also then shortly after that I rejoined the military in the form of flying the C97 Stratocruiser with the Minnesota Air National Guard. Shortly after that, for about 6 months, we converted to C-130s, flying the same airplanes, some of the same airplanes I'd flown out of Okinawa. So I became a C-130 instructor pilot and spent almost 17 years with the Minnesota Air National Guard. So in conclusion, I wound up with 22 years of military flying, 5 years of active duty, and 17 years in the Minnesota Air National Guard. Additionally, I had 32 years at Northwest Airlines on the 727, 707, and DC-10 with about 20,000 hours and without any incidents, no blown tires or anything. So I retired from the airline on June 1st at my birthday, age 60, at the mandatory age of 60 as a DC-10 captain. So that pretty much wraps up my 40 years, basically almost 40 years of flying with the military and Northwest Airlines.